The following production is intended for entertainment purposes only. We are not legal professionals. We do not speak for any government agency, and the opinions expressed here are our own. Relax.
Works every time.
Yep.
What were you about to say?
So someone asked a question. Someone posed a question to our episodes that are already out. And I think it's a good question because it's kind of clarifying. They said, why are old religions bad, supposedly, and new religions are good? And I think it's because we were criticizing kind of Western evangelicalism. And
now run it by me again. Old religion's bad, new religion's good.
Yeah, that's what the comment, and I'm obviously not quoting it for verbatim, but the comment was, why are old religions bad, supposedly, and new religions are good? Now, Mr. Commenter, I'm sorry, I'm misquoting you, but I was thinking about that, and so obviously I didn't communicate what I think about that, right? If that's what someone got, because that's not how I feel. Sorry.
Yeah, I would say that probably, I think that both of us would disagree with that,
Yeah.
and lean more toward old religions being good and new religions being, I wouldn't say bad, but being perverted or wrong.
It says, how are religions of the past looked at as wrong, ? But the religions of modern times accepted, ? And I think it was because of the criticism of Western evangelicalism that we've been pretty heavy on. And me, I go hard on the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And but I wouldn't say that there is, I definitely wouldn't say that they're bad or that they're wrong. That they're wrong in any way. I think it's more of what it does for you, and you have to boil it down, you know what I mean, to what it means for you.
Yeah.
So that reminded me of something we talked about before, but I just got to scratch the surface, and that was Seneca and Plato.
Yeah.
And Stoicism. If you don't mind, I'd like to talk about the first book of Seneca.
Yeah. No, I like
not Seneca, Socrates. I'm sorry.
I like all the Stoic philosophies.
So, shucks, I was on a roll this morning. Just taking notes. Oh, so so Plato is the author. He's talking about his teacher Socrates, not Seneca. Seneca was a different Stoic, and Socrates isn't traditionally a Stoic, but he's definitely the foundation of that philosophy that led to Stoicism. He laid the foundation of in this book, The Republic. So the book opens up that Socrates and his homeboys are leaving a religious festival in Athens. They're on their way, and they showed up. This was the law. This was the law that people had to come take part in the sacrifices. Take part of the sacrifices to honor the gods, or they're not going to protect our city. So he had to show up, throw some rice at Zeus and Helen, and all the Greek folks. And he was on his way out of the city, and Socrates, so I'll Quentin Tarantino it a little bit, he ended up being killed for his radical ideas of philosophy. And that was kind of what they used as a justification. Like, his philosophy was a threat because it challenged their old gods and their theology at the time. It challenged their theology, and it challenged the old law and the old concept of justice.
Now, in a nutshell, though, what was his philosophy? What was so different? What was so challenging?
So that's what's beautiful about Socrates and Plato. And I remember I brought it up before, talking about the Socratic method and how to critically think. He doesn't necessarily lay out a real definition of justice. Book 1 is all about justice. So he's killed for challenging the gods and modern ideas of the legal system. Like, he was a rebel, and they killed him for it because he challenged the old theology, kind of like Jesus. But so he's on his way. Let me go back to the beginning of this. He's on his way out of the city after this religious festival that he was legally mandated to participate in. And this old rich old guy, they all happen to have bands of young boys around them, especially the rich. Yeah, dude, it's ancient Greece, homie. They got down like that.
Like Puff Daddy or something?
Yeah, exactly. Like Diddy. He sends his young boys to chase down Socrates, and the boys run up on Socrates and they say, "Hey, our master wants you to come to our house." And Socrates is like, "Well, I don't want to." And they're like, "Are you stronger than all of us?" And Socrates has a friend, and he's like, "Obviously, we're not stronger than all of you." I know what you would have said.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yes,
I know what you would have said. So they said, "Are you stronger than us?" They're like, "No, we're not stronger than you all." They're like, "Well, then you're gonna come with us." So they kidnapped him, like under threat of violence. They bring Socrates to this rich old dude who's actually an okay character. He's not a bad character in this. And he's you can imagine him like eating grapes, and he's got little boys rubbing his feet, and someone's pouring him wine. And when I say little boys, I mean young men over 18, so no one's upset. And anyway, Socrates is like, "Hey, what's up? You've had a good life. You know, you're rich, you're powerful. You should be good. You should be happy." And the guy says, "Well, I would be happy. You're right. It is a good thing to be rich, but it's not as good as people say." Like, he says that it doesn't mean as much as people think it does, but it is good. And it is like, it's good to be powerful. It's not as good as people say it is, but it is good. He said, "But what I'm really scared of is death." And Socrates is like, "Why are you scared of death? Death is natural. It's a part of every single life." And this old guy, Cephalus, his name is Cephalus. This old guy tells him, he's like, "I'm afraid to die," because the theology at the time, and this was 500 years before current era, so 500 years before Christ.
Okay.
The theology of Athens at the time was, if you follow the rules, we have rules. If you follow the rules and you live a good life and you're good, Zeus is going to reward you in the afterlife. If you're bad and you didn't follow the rules, you're going to have an eternity of torture and pain. And so one of the prevailing ideas now is that the Greco-Roman period introduced this idea into ancient Israelites.
Oh, okay.
And so that might have been the source of it. That's a theory, but I think a pretty popular theory. Anyway, so the old rich guy says, "I'm afraid of dying." And Socrates is like, "Why? You know, life is part of it." He's like, "If there is justice, then I'm not 100% convinced that I'm going to go to the good place. You know, I've lived a human life, and I've maybe done bad things here or there, or things that at least is questionable to me. I don't know if I followed all the rules the way that the rules were supposed to be followed."
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think this goes together really well with that comment, and something that's just kind of our theme a little bit, spirituality and philosophy. But Seneca answers him and says, well, he asks him, all Seneca does ever is ask questions. Socrates, not Seneca. Thank you. All Socrates ever does is ask questions and finds holes in your thoughts of your definitions. He does lay out this loose definition at the end, but he says, "So what's justice? If you're afraid of justice, what's justice?" And this old guy Cephalus says, "I'm afraid," or justice is basically following the laws and always telling the truth. And Socrates, "Surely it's more than just that, or it can't be just that." And he says, "No, boil it down. That's it. Follow the laws and tell the truth. That's justice." And they're talking about in a societal view. My idea of justice is like punishing the wicked. But so he says, yeah, like justice in the societal view is following the laws and telling the truth. And Socrates lays out this example that everyone can easily understand is like, what if you have a friend come from out of town, and back then everyone traveled with weapons on the roads because they were afraid of bandits. So you travel in a group, and everyone would be strapped just in case someone tried to jump them on the way there.
Mm-hmm.
What if you had a friend come from out of town and he put his weapons up at your house? Because another common thing is that weapons weren't allowed in the city. They had to be, put away. Your friend came from out of town, put his weapons in your house, and then went out in town, and let's say he got drunk or went crazy, got mad. That was a thing that was real popular. They'd say people would lose their minds and go mad. What if he was mad and came back to you and said, "Give me my weapons. I'm going to go kill someone"? Wouldn't it be they have the legal right to their property? But you wouldn't say that that's the good thing to do, to give him
Right.
as obviously you wouldn't give it to him.
Right.
But if justice is telling the truth and following the law in that strict version or that strict sense, shouldn't you have to give him his weapons? And the old guy was like, well, obviously that would be a mistake. He was like, okay, well then justice isn't that. And pretty much at the first cue, Cephalus takes off and he's like, oh, someone's calling my name over here. I got to go. Cephalus takes off and his son picks up the argument. But what do you think about that? Just that first one of justice is following the rules and telling the truth in a societal view. Or I guess what's your definition of justice?
Well, I don't see how either of those are necessarily a definition of justice. I think they're both great ideas.
Uh-huh.
But to me, justice is an appropriate response for a specific action.
Uh-huh.
So to me, like, it doesn't really have anything to do with telling the truth. I mean, that's a standard. Yeah, you should tell the truth.
Would you say it's unjust to tell the truth? Or
I don't think-
to lie? Unjust to lie?
I think it's a different question. I
Yeah.
think the question of justice comes in when you don't tell the truth. So what's the appropriate response to that? What's the appropriate?
Okay.
I don't even want to say punishment, because you could have. It's not necessarily punishment, because justice for a good deed would be
A reward.
an appropriate reward. So to me, it seems like justice has to do with the response or an action based on an action you took or didn't take.
Okay. So we'll go here, because that's an idea brought up later. Part of that is an idea brought up later, is that it's like natural, it's natural consequences. You would say natural consequences to what happens.
Or karma, almost.
Karma. And so Socrates answers this and says, well, have you ever known a just person to receive punishment for something he didn't do?
Dang it, we got hung up.
Have you ever known a just person to receive punishment for something that he didn't do? Have you ever known a just person to be persecuted?
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever known an unjust person to receive a reward?
Yes.
And so that is not the natural consequences then. Then karma is not at work when those things happen.
Well, I mean, they could be, but I think karma operates outside and above us. So, an example could be, if I were to steal these recordings and take them somewhere and publish them and make a bunch of money, or do something, make a name for myself, and at the same time somehow harm you, even though the karma may not come immediately, that doesn't mean that it's not at work or that it's not coming. It's the same. I think we would say the same about God's justice. Like in Psalms, in the Psalms, David talks about the wicked thrive, basically, and the righteous are persecuted.
Mm-hmm.
Where's the justice in that? But I think that justice is it's a slow process.
It's a long game.
Yeah.
So what about families? And I don't know the conspiratorial portrayal of families like the Rothschilds, or the Illuminati, or these back groups that have been around forever. These secret society or secret families that have been around forever, and there does seem to be pockets of power, and we've always heard about it, so it's not
Yeah.
based on fantasy. What about things like that? These families that have been in power and have been billionaires for thousands, or for hundreds of years. What about them?
Yeah. Well, I think you also have to look at, like, money and power isn't necessarily, it's not the end goal. I mean, it may be the end goal for a lot of people, but like the guy in the story says, it's not all it's cracked up to be. And you look at rich and powerful people and the lives they lead, and the I guess the challenges they face, or whatever they encounter on a daily basis, they may prefer a more simple life. And yeah, the conveniences are great, but is the satisfaction, or is the
Yeah, but are you going to say that's a punishment? Oh, to be rich and depressed, is that really a punishment, though?
I think it could be. I think it
Okay.
absolutely could be.
Okay.
I mean,
Which would you rather be? Really happy and too poor to feed your kids? Or,
well, that's
okay,
that,
really happy and super poor, like how I was, welfare and food closet, single mom, single dishwasher mom in a town like Oak Lawn. Would you rather be that and happy, or one of the rich families that there's a bunch of, one of the rich families and depressed? Which would you rather be?
I mean, I'm poor and depressed right now, so why not be rich and depressed?
Why not be rich and depressed?
Yeah, I mean, I think human nature is to want more power and to want more money, but just because you want it doesn't mean that that's the goal, or that that's better than the alternative.
Yeah. And so this is all within the confines of this book, or of the first book, everything you're talking about. And also I think we need to remember that this is being translated from ancient Greek. And so the word that we have for what he was talking about is justice, but that's not necessarily cognated the same way back then. And so that's why I say I know what you're talking about, of like the natural rewards and the natural reward of that, but they're talking more of a societal justice, like right and wrong is the justice they're talking about. Like what does it mean to be right and wrong? Instead,
Gotcha.
that's what they're using for justice.
From a strictly legal perspective, or from a moral perspective?
So it started off from the perspective of this guy who was afraid he was going to die and be punished because
moral. Okay.
Because he didn't follow the rules, and the rules were law back then. He didn't follow the rules of the gods of Athens strictly. He doesn't know if he did. So from that sense.
Yeah. So in that case, I mean, that's a mixture of the two. Like, that would be the equivalent of an Old Testament citizen not following the sacrificial laws or whatever, which were the actual, I mean, from what I understand, they were the actual societal laws. Based on the religious laws. And so the concern wouldn't be that I'm going to jail. It would be that I'm going to the Old Testament equivalent of hell, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not. I'm not sure if they had a concept for that. It may have been more that God's not going to be pleased with me and won't bless me.
I think the spiritual world was the physical world to them, meaning that, like, I don't think they were concerned of, from the way it's been explained, is that the hell is God is going to curse the land. God cursed the land because of the sins of the people. That's the hell that they were afraid of.
Okay.
Yeah. Because hell wasn't a thing back then.
Yeah.
Chill.
Well,
so
go ahead.
Yeah. No, well, so from the word we're using is justice, but what we're meaning is what is right and wrong in the concept of dying and being judged. How this relates to kind of the theme of what we're always talking about is that if you don't follow the theology to a T, you're going to die and go to hell.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, that's definitely been the foundation of
Yeah.
of that theology. So from that perspective, what is justice? And like I said, we're using the word justice for that.
Yeah. Man, I was thinking about this the other day, like just in regards to some of the things that you and I are working through or believe or don't believe anymore. And I was thinking, man, like this isn't I'm not trying to shirk responsibility. I'm not trying to not take responsibility for my own thoughts. But based on, I'm 44 years old, and I've been in religion my entire life.
Uh-huh.
And so I have a lot more knowledge about religion than a lot of people.
Yeah.
But what are the odds that I've got it right, or that I could even possibly have it right?
Right.
Like it's minuscule. Like there's just no way. And then to say that, oh, I'm sorry, you got it wrong, so to hell you go.
Right.
Like that doesn't sound just.
No. And man, I've kind of been doing this lately, and I want to get out of it. I don't want it to seem like I'm bashing preachers that I listen to,
Yeah.
because that's not my intention. But there was a preacher I was listening to recently that said, "Oh shucks, man, I just had a total brain dump. What were we just saying?"
Well, we were talking about justice, and like to me, there's just no way that you could have it right, because we don't, it kind of goes back to something I'd said a while back, that even the concept of God
God dang.
is this indescribable, unknowable being, creature, force, whatever. Like he's so far beyond our comprehension that for me to try to describe him, I'm literally trying to describe something that's indescribable.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to put I'm trying to understand something that's ununderstandable. And so to say that, well, I understand enough that this, you've got to believe this part.
Okay.
Like that's absurd.
Yeah. So based off the fruits of the Spirit that Jesus said, you'll know them by these fruits. And these are the fruits of the Spirit. And what he was saying is you're going to know God is in them because they exhibit these fruits in their life. So these fruits are like a characteristic of God, you would say. They're definitely a characteristic of you being in God. This God through you is showing these fruits. And these are what? Hope. Do you know the fruits of the Spirit? Figured
Love, joy, peace, goodness, meekness, long suffering.
So, do any of those things describe the God of the Old Testament that told the children of Israel to go in to the land of Canaan and kill everything living, including every elderly, every woman, every child, every animal, a huge giant blood sacrifice to cleanse the land of the sin of that people? These people are so wicked that you have to go in there and cleanse the land by killing everything. That was the commandment. Is that the fruits of the Spirit?
So I'll tell you what I would have said.
Okay.
What I would have said a couple of years ago is that that's a sign of, first off, patience, because God had been patient with the children of Israel up until a point, and perhaps even the Canaanites, I don't know, but so he exhibited his patience with the Israelites, because they're constant, turning away and coming back and turning, all that kind of stuff. But it's also a sign of his love, because he loves humanity so much that there's a point where he won't tolerate their sin anymore. And that's the same argument for the flood, or maybe the same argument for all of the conquest narrative, that I love humanity so much that I'm going to wipe these people out because they're so naughty.
Can I ask that guy a question?
Yeah. Okay, let me get back. Let me get into character.
What about kids? What about children? Did they have the opportunity to become evil?
There's a verse in the Psalms. There's a single verse that I know of where David is talking about the child that he had with Bathsheba,
Bathsheba. Uh-huh.
and the child died in childhood. And David says something along the lines that he'll see that he'll be reunited with that child. So my understanding is that's where the entire concept of the age of accountability comes from, because we're not comfortable with a God that sends an infant to hell. So we find this verse in Psalm whatever that says that David will be reunited. So we can say, okay, well, if David was reunited with that child, then we'll be reunited with ours, and therefore God must not send kids to hell unless they're at an age of accountability where they can decide for themselves.
Yeah.
But then you have to open that up also to mentally disabled, or any other kind of
disenfranchised or not yet, not in total control.
yeah. But then I think if you do that, then I think you have to say, okay, well, what about the Palestinian kid that he's been brought up his entire life to believe that Israel, for example, is the enemy.
Yeah,
and the God of Israel,
who's actually by biblical bloodline is a descendant of those Canaanites, the current Palestinian.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, this goes back to them.
Okay.
The people on the north and south of them.
So think about that. So think if you're a Canaanite, what do you think about the God of Israel? What have
he
you been
wants you
told?
dead?
Yeah, because of your heritage, because of what no other. You're a kid. You're not a part of whatever wickedness is going on.
Right.
But still, like because of your nationality or geography or whatever,
yeah,
God wants you dead.
So let me try to bring this back to what we were talking about. So with my current understanding, or I don't know where I'm at, is I can get down with the God, if he wanted to use the name for him, Yahweh, whatever, that Jesus was saying that he's in, and he's in him, and we're going to be in him just like he's in him. If I want to get down with the God that Jesus was talking about, I can get down with a God that exhibits the fruits of the Spirit. The book of Revelation is a stretch for me, but I can get down with the God that Jesus was talking about. Conceptually, right in my spirit, what I understand to be right and wrong, and justice, my interpretation of justice, I can agree with that. I think there's lots of good lessons, and so I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying this is wrong. I'm just saying the God of the Old Testament is not the same God in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
They're not the same person. The God that, even if they have the same name, even if Jesus might have been talking about him, how I'm conceptualizing it in 2024 as, a non-Israelite, whatever, is that it's not the same person, because the God of the Old Testament, how I see it, and there's dozens of other stories, but like how they treat women, how they treat people of other faiths, people of other blood types, people of other, nationalities, how they treat slaves. That's not the thing that I want to make God in my life.
Yeah.
But Jesus and the God he was talking about, I can get down with that. I don't think there's any problem with that at all.
There's a couple good books that kind of touch on that.
Yeah.
I'll let you finish your thought.
Oh no, I was just going to bring it back to Socrates. But what are the books?
So one of them is Rob Bell, and I think it's called "What Is the Bible?"
Rob Bell seems like that. Is Rob Bell openly gay?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay. Well, he definitely is. By the way.
I'll let
By
him
the
know.
way, I called this about P. Diddy around the Super Bowl, I think. And I even texted you and I said, isn't P. Diddy and Usher gay? And you were like, no, bro, you're imagining it. I called this.
I'll check the record because I don't delete my text messages. I don't
Good.
remember that conversation.
Okay.
Um, there's another one. I can't remember who wrote it. What do we talk about when we talk about God or something like that?
I've heard of that book.
But both of those kind of gave me the perspective that a lot of the Old Testament was written from a perspective of kind of like justifying their actions. So
Yeah.
there's two different thoughts. One is like justifying their actions. The other is hyperbole.
Yeah, and maybe the hyperbole is part of this, but they're telling a story to explain where they're at right now, even though the
Yeah.
story goes back thousands of years.
Yeah, yeah, and you know,
And this story was passed down thousands of years verbally.
and I think Rob Bell is the one that talks about how they may not have even, a lot of these battles may not have even happened, but if they
Yeah.
did, they probably didn't wipe out every man, woman, and child. That's just how they're telling the story. Like
Yeah.
we beat them so soundly, there wasn't a single survivor.
Yes.
And you know,
Which
just
based on the grammatics is the same language they were using when they said there is no other God
Yeah.
except our God.
yeah,
It's
exactly.
it's the same rivalry sports grammatics that they were using whenever they said we wiped out every single man, woman, and child.
Yeah. And that to me just makes so much more sense than to say that, well, the Old Testament God was like this and the New Testament God is Jesus. It makes a lot more sense to say, okay, so you've got a group of people trying to explain how they got to where they are,
Right.
trying to explain what they see, and even trying to explain, why do we hate those people? Why do those
Right.
people hate us? Well, it's because of this battle way back when. That makes a
Yeah.
lot more sense than to say that, well, God told us to kill them all. And
It goes back to Abraham. And if Abraham wouldn't have sinned against God, this whole thing wouldn't have been happening.
Mhm.
If he would have just trusted God and not slept with Sarah's slave,
Yeah.
this whole thing wouldn't have happened.
Another answer that I've heard that I never have put a whole lot of stock in is some would say that, well, justice was satisfied on the cross, and so because of that, God is no longer like he's no longer got that. How would you
This
say
is
it?
this is pretty
How's-
close to my view, or my old view. My
Okay.
main view. What you're talking about is that God was a God of blood, and he demanded sacrifice because sin separates you from him, and he has to have law. He has to have standards, and he can't make himself a liar. And so if he said that you can't do this, then you can't do it. And if you do, that separates you from him.
Mhm.
And so there has to be a way for you to rejoin him, for you to reunite with him. And in the Old Testament, that was through blood.
Mhm.
That was through the death of animals, and that was through the death of sometimes cities of people, and that was through the death,
Sometimes children, sometimes your own children.
Sometimes your brother, like in the case of the Israelites when Moses came down from the mountain and told them to kill 2/3 of their brothers, the ones that worship the cattle, the false idol. So 2/3 of the Israelites were wiped out because they had a different religious view.
Can you imagine trying to explain that one? Like I was tying my shoe. I wasn't worshiping that calf.
Yeah.
I
And by
didn't
the
mean it.
way, this is in a time when God spoke verbally God told the children of Israel what to do through Moses, and Moses was up on the mountain for days and days. They thought they were abandoned by their old God. They thought they were abandoned by their God. And so they turned to Aaron and said, "Hey, what are we going to do?" And he said, "Get that cow, make it gold.
Yeah.
This is our God now." And by the way, I've heard it explained like this, and I really liked it, was like, put yourself in the mind of a child back then, like a young boy, and you see your adults, your parents are really worried, and they keep saying that God's abandoned us, and we don't know what to do. We just escaped this thing. Maybe we shouldn't have escaped it. so you see the parents that are worried about this, that God's abandoned them, and then you hear that we have a new God, and he's a cow. We know what cows look like. We know that we
Yeah.
get milk from cow. We know this thing, and he's gold. I can get down with this. I'm a little kid. I see my family. All of a sudden, hope is returning to them.
Mhm.
Now we have this thing. Now this crazy guy comes off the mountain and is so pissed off. He has these tablets that God's finger touched and wrote on these tablets. This guy is so pissed off that he throws these tablets and breaks them.
Mhm.
Leaves again, comes back with some new tablets, and then 2/3 of my entire civilization is wiped out. How can you say that's the same? I can't personally. I don't know. I can't say what anyone can do. I can't personally say that's the same guy that Jesus was talking about, at least
Yeah,
in my conceptualization.
Or could you even say that they're the same being, period?
I couldn't, but yeah, I couldn't say that.
Yeah. I think that's why a lot of again, we do go kind of hard on evangelicals, which
Yeah.
I still am an evangelical.
Yeah.
I think that's why a lot of us don't talk about the Old Testament, because the
Yeah.
reality is it's really hard to,
It's rough.
it's hard to make the two go together.
Yeah.
Without just ignoring certain things or bending logic or just being completely hypocritical.
Well, just the New Testament, you don't realize how much, at least I didn't realize how much I did this until I took a step back. But if you read the black and white, or sometimes red and white words of the New Testament, it does not equal the theology that we have today, that theology that we're saying is inspired by it. Not in every way. And
Interesting. Tell me more about that.
And so the main thing I'm thinking of is, well, there's these, trying to figure out, there's a couple different ways to go in here. So like there's these weird images of like folklore from the New Testament that, especially if the word of the Lord is inerrant, and perfect, that it's Jesus rode into town on a donkey that was also on top of an ass. I think it's Matthew. I'm pretty sure Matthew, but I think either Mark or Luke also say something like that. And there were early church paintings of this image that was Jesus riding a donkey, like side saddle,
Like a trick show? Do they still do those at rodeos?
Yeah,
Like trick shows?
like he's wearing a dress.
Okay.
And he's sitting on one donkey and his feet is resting on a smaller donkey.
Okay.
And there was, I think, another painting, like early pre-Renaissance medieval period, of the donkey, Jesus, like at the top of a pyramid. Jesus is on top of a donkey who's on top of a bigger donkey who's walking into the city of Jerusalem, just so it fulfilled a prophecy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, what was I trying to get to? Just inerrancies in the New Testament. So yeah, so the New Testament is a stretch for us to say, like, our theology, and that's, I know an immature example, but a black and white example of, if our theology is that every word in the scripture is inerrant and right, and it was 7 days, and it was a virgin, and he did rise from the dead, then then the black and white maybe doesn't always support that. Or at least when you look at it with any type of critical thought.
Yeah.
With and for the relationship to be real, you do have to look at it critically.
Yeah. I agree with you.
Yeah.
However, I would have said just a couple years ago that I've always been skeptical. I've always been just kind of a cynic at heart, but I still firmly believed all of the main doctrines.
Yeah.
How do I want to say it? But I feel like I'm just now looking at it critically.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm just now looking at, well, wait a second. How did they record the conversation between Jesus and Pilate?
Yeah.
Like who wrote that down?
Who wrote it down?
Or like just understanding that they would have, at least some of the gospel writers would have seen Jesus as the Messiah. And so because of that, they're interpreting what they see in light of that. And so it's not like you really can't look at it as eyewitness account. You know, an example. Let's say that you committed some kind of a crime, and I knew what you were about. I knew what to expect. Everything that you do, I'm going to be looking at it in light of what I expect.
Yes, which is
So that's
how we profile every single suspect.
yeah. And so that's fine if you give an eyewitness statement. I mean, I'll take it for what it's worth. But I also have to remember, okay, he might not be looking at this through clear lenses. He may be telling this story in light of something that he wants to accomplish or point that he wants to make or whatever. That might not be 100% true. You know what I mean?
And so something to think about this is the New Testament and the Old Testament wasn't written that far apart, like within the matter of 500 to 600 years. And so grammatically, things had not advanced as much as, say, it has in 2000 years since it's been written.
I think it was 400. I think that's the
this is
intertestamental period.
Yeah, the intertestamental period is about 400 years. That's right. And so things have not changed that much grammatically and, you know, philosophically and theologically, you'd think. So when the Old Testament, the idea, pretty strong hypothesis is, I think logically, we built this story to explain how we got here, you know, and for them to kind of know that's what it means. Like, yeah, we have the sacred text and we believe it's written on our heart, but we know, you know, at least it seems like that, because it makes sense that they did it again, because the earliest, I think, documented writing of the New Testaments was 60 years after Christ, or BC or CE, current era.
Yeah. Yeah,
like the earliest writings were 60 years after, you know, into the current era. And so you figure the disciples, they had to be in their, Jesus was 30 or what, 33.
Yeah.
Okay, so Jesus was 33. His disciples had to be around the same age. And so they're 90 when people don't live past 60. They're 90 writing this down. Any type of critical thought, you find holes in the theology part.
Yeah. I think that, and so I think maybe to bring it full circle, to say that I think the old religions are wrong and new religions are right. I would say that all religions are trying to explain life and trying to explain not just our story as, you know, Americans, but like our story as humanity, as not even a civilization, as a species. Like, why do we have this guilt and this, you know, this feeling of shame? Well, that's because we describe it as sin. Like we've violated some kind of law. Well, whose law? I don't know. It's a law written on my heart. Okay, so that means it must be from something bigger than me. And if we all feel the same thing, then it must be something bigger than all of us. So it must be from God.
Yeah.
Which I agree with. But I think that I agree with it because that's how I conceptualize, like that's how it makes sense to my mind.
Yeah. So I agree with that, but in a way of not divorcing myself from the theology, but not being married to it anymore, that is right. And Ganesh and Hanuman and Ram can also be right, because I think we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah, I think so. And I think maybe that goes back to what is right, what is true. Well,
What is justice?
what is justice? And I don't have I can't give a proper definition for truth, but I can say that I don't think that truth necessarily means that something literally happened. I think you can tell a story, and I used to do this with my kids all the time. I would make up stories at bedtime,
Uh-huh.
like Prince Sylvan for Silas and Princess Marguerite, and I would make up these stories of Prince Sylvan did this or that, and Marguerite did this or that. But the purpose of it was to try to tell a bigger story.
Uh-huh.
And so the stories that I made up are obviously not true. There's no Prince Sylvan, wandering through the forest. But the point was still true, that, bravery and courage and sacrifice and all those kind of things I was trying to express.
Uh-huh.
Those principles, I think, are true.
Yeah.
Just like the stories in the Bible.
Yeah.
They
Just like
may
the
have,
fruits of the spirit.
yeah, these things may have happened or they may not have happened, but that doesn't matter. That's not the point. The point
Mhm.
is to understand why we are the way we are.
Yes.
And yeah, I guess just leave it at that.
Well, and I think that allows the possibility, because it's funny, because we're still kind of in the same conversation that Socrates was having, because someone said, well, that means you just get to be wishy-washy and pick and choose whatever whatever pieces of the gods you think is right and whatever you think is wrong. And he answers it and oh shucks, he lost it. But he answers it and says, yeah, that's what we all do. That's what you do whether you know it or not. Like, even if you accept letter by letter, it's still going through your ears and it's still going through your eyes. And so we're whether you're always picking and choosing. He said, but this way I get to do it that lines up with what I know as justice.
Yeah.
Because if we have these problems too, like we were just talking about. The thing was, Zeus is the one who judges your justice and determines where you go after hell. But we know that Zeus slept with every woman, committed adultery dozens of times, murdered the husbands of his lovers, wiped out whole cities and towns in wars, did the same atrocities that our old guy did. But he's the one who judges justice. And this is what Socrates is pointing out. I was like, obviously, we're choosing to ignore some of these things whenever we say we're solely committed. That's one of the reasons why he was killed, is because he challenged the old gods. We're at what, 2 hours?
Yes. Yeah, right out. One thing I wanted to point out, there's a guy at church that he's an older guy that I respect. He seems like a smart guy. He's raised his family. He's got a good family, married for a lot of years. Just the kind of guy that I want to emulate. So I've met with him on a semi-regular basis, running some of these ideas by him. And the last time we met, he said, Justin, at some point, you just have to have enough evidence to say, I got enough evidence. I don't need to question anymore. And he said that it sounds to me like you're leaning on your own understanding.
Yeah.
And Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says, lean not on your own understanding. And I get that.
Yeah.
But I left there thinking, well, isn't that what we all do? Like, don't you have to, at the end of the day, to make any decision, to have any faith in anything, you've got to lean on your own understanding.
Yeah.
Because I can't lean on your understanding.
Right.
Even if I want to, I'm still leaning on my understanding by saying, well, Clayton's right. So I'm
still interpreting what you're telling me about the thing.
Yeah.
It's still going to be me processing it, me picking out the pieces.
Yeah. And so, and I've heard that argument before. Well, if you don't believe the whole Bible, then you're not worshiping the God of the Bible. You're worshiping your own God. You're
Yeah.
worshiping the God that you've created. But we all do. You've
That's
got
what
to.
we do. Yeah,
You've
that's
got to.
what we do.
And so maybe this is, I'm not going to stand behind this. I'm just going to throw it
Okay.
out there. So maybe that means that God is inside us. Maybe that means that God, and this isn't going to sound, it's not going to come out how I want, but maybe it means that God is in our head.
Yeah.
And I know, I mean, even saying that, just like I can't convey what I'm trying to say. But
So,
like I believe, I believe that Satan, the name Satan, the character Satan, is part of our psyche.
Yeah.
I don't think that there's an entity walking around or flying around or whatever by the name of Satan.
Right.
I think that
Lucifer.
I think that Satan is you could even say maybe he's like the culmination of all evil. He's the end result of all evil. He's the source of all evil. But it's not a he. It's not an entity. It's within me. He's within you. And so the logical thing would be to say, well, okay, then could you say God is the same? That God is the ultimate of all good? Good.
So real quick rebuttal from what I would have said back in my day is the Bible specifically outlines, describes the devil, like the Bible specifically describes him, is what I would have said.
Yeah.
Because that's what I would have heard, and that's what I would have regurgitated dozens of times. But now, like in today, I know that to not necessarily be true, even to the point where like the earliest manifestation of the devil that every child gets is the snake in the Garden of Eden. Well, that wasn't until hundreds of years after the New Testament that figure was identified as Satan.
Mm-hmm.
The New Testament ink had already been dry for hundreds of years before the theology came to identify that as Satan. And so what I would have said, like I said, is the Bible clearly describes Lucifer, like the tempter that confronted Jesus.
Yeah, but what's crazy is, like, I think there's only a couple, maybe literally 2 times where the name Lucifer is in the Bible.
Uh-huh.
But if you look at a Strong's Concordance, one of those times Lucifer is attributed to Jesus. The name Lucifer is attributed to Jesus.
Yes.
And so you look at okay, so where else is the devil talked about? Well, the other times he's talked about, he's being described as a role or a almost like characteristics. Well, the accuser.
Yeah, the tempter.
So,
and the accuser.
Which could be anybody or anything, not necessarily.
Which could be that voice in your head that's always there that says the most messed up stuff and that you never even show the light of day to, but says that thing that you would never tell anyone.
Yeah. Or even tempts you to do things that you would never do.
Of course not.
You would never even consider it. But where's that thought come from?
Think about when you're depressed, like the crazy thoughts that come to you when you're depressed, or the crazy thoughts that come to you if you drink, if you get drunk sometimes, the crazy thoughts, the crazy weird urges that even when you're drunk, I would never really do that, but that's a crazy thought.
Yeah. Or like in anger or whatever the scenario
is.
When
you get super surprised and pissed off, like you just discover someone doing something that makes you really mad.
Yeah.
That's in you. Yeah.
And so I guess on one hand you could say, well, that's the devil tempting you. But from a scientific, and I'm not a scientist by any means, I'm not a smart guy, but just based on what I know, you could probably also trace that back to chemicals in your brain.
I think psychologically.
Yeah.
I think psychological, but based on psychology, that is a fundamental part of you. That is a foundation of your consciousness.
Yeah.
That shadow self.
And so I don't know why it's so easy for me to, it's easy for me to believe that Satan isn't an actual being, that he's a part of our psyche. I can't do that with God. It's tempting. I mean, because it's the other side of presumably the same coin.
Uh-huh.
But I think maybe it's because to say that makes it feel like, I don't know, maybe you're giving too much up. Maybe you're
Yeah.
giving up too much ground. It's an uncomfortable feeling for me to go that far.
Yeah.
But I do get the sense that God is, at the very least, the sum of all good, and if you imagine it makes me sound like it sounds kind of kooky, I think, but if you think of like energy, negative
Uh-huh.
energy, positive energy,
Yeah.
that God is the sum of all positive energy,
Sure.
and the sum of all good.
That's a good description.
Yeah,
But then isn't that equal to the sum of all bad?
that's the problem.
Right.
And so you would have to say, well, there's that good, that positive is stronger than negative, that positive energy is ultimately going to defeat negative energy, or good is going to defeat evil, whatever, however you conceptualize it.
And all of this is your theology, that's your personal theology that you're putting on top of nothing that's ever mentioned in the New Testament.
Say
right?
that again. Say that again.
All this is your theology, like all these vibrations and all the stuff that is right and true to you is your theology that I think even subconsciously back then you were having to put onto the New Testament. You were having this internal dialogue even back then. You just didn't recognize it.
Well, we just had different names for it,
Yeah.
and that's one of the things that one of the reasons why I still feel qualified is not the right word. Why I still feel okay to go to an evangelical church.
Yeah.
Because while I don't believe that the Garden of Eden story literally happened,
Sure.
I do believe that it's telling the story of why we make wrong choices,
Yes.
why we sin. Well, because we're tempted, and because we want this or we want that,
and maybe even there's some deeper truths in there. I think before at least for me, and I think you did this a little bit too, before I went off the ledge of deconstruction, I was very liberally giving God a bunch of attributes of connecting him to the others. You know what I mean? Like saying, and that is Ganesh, and that is
okay.
Hanuman. Yeah, which I guess I still kind of do. But before I went off the edge of deconstruction, I was very liberally heaping that onto the God of the Old Testament.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's kind of where I am now, that, I think I've described it before as, it feels like we're looking at this cloud,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm looking at it from this angle and I see a giraffe,
Yeah.
and you're looking at it from that angle, you see an elephant. It's the same cloud. It's a different perspective. And it may even, here's what if you've never seen an elephant?
Yeah.
Well, you're only going to describe it the way that you can conceptualize it.
Well, here's how they described it: monster, Leviathan. You know what I mean? When someone who's never seen an elephant, say in sub-Sahara Africa, goes to Egypt, which they did a lot, and sees an elephant and comes back and describes it to someone else who's never seen an elephant, like, we call it this, they call it that. It's this giant thing as big as a house, has a snake growing out of its face, has swords on the side of its head, has these two dishes that can move. They're like wings, but he can't fly because he's so fat. And he has a little pigtail. They're like, oh, you're describing a monster. You're describing a demon.
Yeah. Yeah, that's and that's how I look at religion.
Yes.
Now, I do think that there can absolutely be false religions. There can absolutely be religions based on whatever, based on lies, or based on deceit, or based on ulterior motives. So I'm not saying.
Would you say that more follows? So this answers another question, commenter. Would you say that what you just described, the kind of nefarious, predatory, taking advantage of people type of religion, would you say that's more like a cult? That's the word I would use a cult for.
I would.
Not occult, as in like the mystical, esoteric
Yeah.
practices, but a cult.
Yeah, I would. But something that's really kind of thrown me for a loop is hearing Christianity referred to as a cult.
Yeah. That's how it started.
That's how it started. Which is, it's crazy. It's crazy to think about, because for us, it's what we've always known. It's always been
the Romans called
standard.
it, the Romans called it pre Constantine, the Romans called it the religion of the slaves and the women. Like this is the religion that's invading in Rome. Like, oh, this new fad. Yeah, all the slaves like it. Oh, and the women like it. Until it started infiltrating these royal families in ancient Rome. And then it became a different story.
Yeah. But then even to think about, okay, so Christianity grew out of Judaism.
Mm-hmm.
And to come to find out that Judaism grew out of a different religion.
Yeah.
And so it's so easy to think that what I've got is what's always been.
Right.
Because what I've got is what's true. Well, what was true before this existed?
Right.
Something else.
Well, I mean, this was a thing that we always denied, and I'm getting conscious of how long we're going, but this is a thing that we always denied, was the straight up scientific backed facts that prove. I'm talking about archaeology, I'm talking about anthropology, I'm talking about these grammatical sciences that straight up prove that Judaism comes from what is the Zoroastrianism, that Judaism comes out of an ancient form of Zoroastrianism, which is, by the way, listed as a book or a religion of the book in Islam. They recognize Zoroastrianism as a follower, like they describe the Jews and the Christians as believers of the book. They also describe the Zoroastrians as believers of the book. So, yeah, we always denied that. Like, if you would have told me that, I would have said that's a lie from the devil. Like, you've been tricked.
For sure.
Like, do you know that
you've been deceived?
You've been deceived, and it sucks that you can't see that. You fool. Yeah. It sucks that you can't see that, but you've been tricked.
Well, one of the things that I just expect from people that may watch this, I don't know. I don't know that anybody will, but a lot of people from my background would look at what we're talking about as what Paul warned about, to not be led astray by the vain philosophies of this world.
Yeah, now, like Socrates.
What's kind of interesting is the philosophers that they would have talked about would have likely been Plato, Aristotle, Socrates,
which Paul incorporates into his teachings, like into the structure of the church. He's incorporating Neoplatonism.
Now, some of those, I don't remember who they were, but some of them would have been contemporaries with
Marcus Aurelius was within 200 years of the explosion of Christianity was a thing when Marcus Aurelius was emperor. It hadn't affected Rome as it eventually ended up doing while he was emperor. It was just a cult in Judea.
Yeah.
It was.
So,
yeah.
So, again, being mindful of the time, I think that sometime in one of these future conversations, I would be curious to think about why are we still talking about it? Like, there's got to be something special. Maybe that's a fallacy. In my mind, it's survived for this long. Why has it not just gone away. I've got some thoughts on that, but I don't.
But we do recognize that it has evolved. It has definitely evolved from the storm god of one of many mentioned in Zoroastrianism, a storm god that happened to be regionally where Israel was. Like
So,
it has certainly evolved since then.
so then would you say it's not that it has survived, but that what we've got today is maybe not completely, but what we've got today is not what was around 2000 years ago. And so it didn't survive. Portions of it survived, and the story has grown into what we've got today.
Or how I say it is, the God that Jesus talked about when he talked about the fruits of the Spirit is a God that I can get with, but not that God of the Old Testament. It's not the same thing. It can't be the same thing. That's where I personally am. But that's just me on my journey. And believe me, I never stop thinking about God.
Yeah.
Like I never stop thinking about God in almost everything that I do. Even thinking about and all those stupid mistakes.
Sometimes I wonder if it's a mental illness.
Yeah.
Like because it can't be normal.
No, I don't meet a lot of other people that talk like this.
Yeah, but the thing is, like for me, and I know it's the same for you, like it's not that we're just talking about it. It consumes my thoughts.
Yes.
And it's not even that I want to like figure it out, because it's not able to be figured out. It's not able to be solved.
Right.
But there's still something within me that just is consumed by it.
Literally, like he wrote it on my heart. Like literally my heart was made, and I know not everybody else is, and that's cool. And I'm not saying it might be a mental illness. It might be a mental illness.
I'm willing to accept that fact.
Well, there are, we're obviously kind of joking, but there are societal mental illness symptoms, like thinking about the anxiety that everyone experienced during COVID, or thinking about the racial tensions and super awareness to that everybody talked about during the BLM protests. Like, just because I'm not racist, now I'm going to tell you, by the way, I'm not racist. And I'm getting anxiety and I'm getting mental illness effects on a societal level.
Yeah. So do you think that maybe what we're dealing with is because of how we were brought up?
I think that's a big part of it. I think that is the universe. So in that macro micro scale of our lives, that is God, who I feel comfortable calling the universe, or God. God's a great word too. That is God shaping the direction of my life. God has brought me to where I am right now. God has brought me to where I am. And where I am is just between me and God, even though I think theologically it's between all of us and we are all part of God. Yeah. But whatever, that's deeper waters. Yeah, that's just between me and God. And whatever you got between you and God is great, dude.
Yeah.
I can't speak for you.
That kind of touches on like sin.
Yeah.
And specifically other people's sin. Because something that's interesting is if you're doing something I don't like, or let me back it up. For me to call somebody else out on sin, on their own sin, essentially what I'm doing is I'm saying, I don't like your behavior. Your behavior bothers me.
Yes.
You could say that maybe some people do it out of love. I don't think generally.
There might be someone listening to this that maybe has a pretty good chance of listening to this that I did that to as a teenager, when I was like a late teenager, when I was super religious, when I was luckily this person I think knew that I was just an arrogant asshole, who thought he was religious, and I think they forgave me. But they were an adult, and I said, hey, I see what you're doing, and just so you know, it's a sin.
It ain't cool, brother.
It ain't cool. It ain't cool, brother. And I remember back then they were like, who are you to tell me this?
Yeah. Yeah. And so like there's absolutely a an application for like examining yourself. Like
Yeah.
where do I need to change my behavior, my thoughts, my actions, whatever. But for me to do that for you, just it seems kind of silly. It seems kind of absurd
There's
because
a
it doesn't have anything to do with me.
there's a guy I really like. He said it's like pointing out the splinter in your brother's eye and ignoring the plank in your own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Oh, I was just gonna say that's an example that I like, that I think maybe I'm just hyper aware to now, of like the Jesus of the New Testament putting down some really applicable wisdom that would make your life heaven. And if there is an afterlife, you have a better chance of being on the good side of it, if you live your life like this. Like, and I'm talking about divine knowledge. I think that knowledge that he came with was from the divine, was from God, that was in him. But yeah, I think that I'm still wrestling with the idea, and I haven't landed yet, but right now I would say I don't know if he thought of himself as God, capital G, like as in a member of the Trinity, as much as which was a common belief in multiple religion systems of the area, that God was living through him and that he's actually connected to the source, and he gets to be like the angel in the Old Testament that burned down Sodom and Gomorrah. He gets to be a holy bearer of God's name. That's why he gets to judge the city, because he's a holy bearer of God's name, which is an academic interpretation of Jesus's language, specifically in John, when he said, I'm in the Father and the Father is in me. So it's not
Yeah.
a stretch to get there. I
had
trashed
something
this game.
I had something else I was going to add on to that, but I think we're now at, are we at 2.5 hours?
2.5.
Holy cow.
So I have to jump off here in a bit, but we don't even have to edit this. Do you like the idea of doing longer episodes or cutting them into segments like I've been doing? Because I'm comfortable with either.
Yeah.
The only reason I like cutting them into segments is because I've heard from listeners that it's a little long,
Yeah.
and that was one that was like an hour and a half.
Yeah.
And
I honestly, even myself, like if I were to review an episode,
yeah,
I don't have 2.5 hours to
yeah,
review.
yeah,
So
it's gonna be at chunks.
yeah, I think that cutting it up into segments is a good idea.
Okay.
I was talking to Cody this morning. You know who I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And he discovered a podcast last night. So
Oh, did he really?
He was listening to it before bed.
Oh, what did he have to say?
Just he thought it was cool. He thought it was
Okay.
exciting. But yeah, I'm still super nervous about. That's why,
Someone,
to be honest, I haven't shared it. I haven't shared it yet. I haven't shared any
I
episodes.
tag you in it. I don't know
I
if
know.
you accept
No.
the text.
Yeah, I do. But I just
There's
so
only one person. So I've come to a point in my life, and I know everyone's thing is different, but I've come to a point in my life where a lot of my childhood hero, like important people of my childhood, I'm talking about, I don't want to offend anyone, but potentially family members or people in that role. As I've lived my adult life, there's just been enough, for not any particular reason. There's just been enough separation from me to where they're not that monumental figure in my life that they were
yeah
20
yeah
years ago. And so I I don't think they would be surprised that I've evolved over 20 years ago. It might not be in the direction that they like, but it definitely can't be a surprise, especially if I lay out to you my exact theology and train of thought how I get there.
Yeah. I think it would, for me, it would be different if I didn't still live in the town that I
Yeah,
grew up in.
I get that.
And so, like, the odds of running into somebody that knew me as a child or that knew me when I was still kind of forming my philosophy and theology, I guess that's pretty likely.
Yeah.
So it would be easier, I think, if I was kind of out of sight.
I also have a skill that I learned from the military that me and my wife both share, and that is the ability to uproot and move to the other side of the country if we need to without knowing anyone, and being able to survive and thrive just fine because we've done it for years in the military. We did it. I wasn't planning on getting out. When I got out of the military, it was an abrupt departure. I haven't talked about this a lot, but I was selected for a warrant officer position in the Army. I had received my commission letter. I was an E6 enlisted, and I applied for a small boat unit that the Army was starting up, and they wanted riverine boat captains to apply, and I was one, and I met all the requirements, and I got accepted. My last week in the Navy, the CW05 in charge of this program calls me and says, "Hey, we had a change to our administrative policies. You don't have any pre-existing medical conditions, do you?" I said, "Yeah, I got a TBI and a traumatic brain injury in Afghanistan, and I got a torn labrum in Afghanistan, and I broke my wrist in Bahrain, but it's cool. I got medical waivers for all that." And he was like, "Oh, we're not accepting medical waivers anymore." I was like, "So I'm not in the program anymore?" He said, "No, you're not in the program anymore." It's like, "Well, then what do I do?" He's like, "Go re-enlist in the Navy." And so I made maybe not the wisest decision, but I think it worked out. Is my family's path. I made the decision to get out of the Navy without a plan. I got out of the Navy with a wife and 2 kids without a plan. And so we immediately fell on her family as resources because I hadn't been a part of my family because went to a group home when I was a teenager. And so they were there, and I could have leaned on them if I would have reached out. Like, I know they would have helped me, but I just hadn't been close to them in decades to reach out. And so she had an active relationship with her mom, so we leaned on her mom. Man, I don't know where I was going with that crazy story.
Well, I think you're talking about your ability to uproot.
So yeah, we have that ability, and when you talk about your situation, I understand that. I'm not degrading that. I empathize with that.
But you also have an ability to. I think you have a lot. I was going to say I think you're more comfortable in your own skin, but I don't know that that's true. I just think you're more willing to be the bad guy, or to at least be kind of persona non grata.
Yeah.
Whereas I have this need to be accepted.
Yeah.
And so, like, I'll keep my mouth shut sometimes, or I won't say things or whatever. Whereas you have no problem.
Yeah.
At least it appears you have no problem saying things.
I mean, it's weird. I don't know. And I even hate this term, but it's a term that I've heard recently that correctly describes it. I think we all are on a scale of some kind of neurodivergence, like some kind of different patterns in the brain. Some people's brain and it's mostly based off genetics and epigenetics, but the way my brain functions is not the same way your brain functions. And that sounds like a weird hippie thing to say, but it correctly describes the way that I felt my entire life. I have always felt like I have recognized that. I'm talking about since I was in preschool and playing with kids in the sand castles. I recognize that they don't talk the same way I talk, and I make people uncomfortable. And in order for me to keep going, I've had to be okay with that. Like, that is just a part of me. And so I can, me and you talked about this before, and I've thought about it since we talked, because you sounded like you were surprised, but I can like someone even if I know they don't like me. Like, I have that ability to do that. And it's honestly because I've had a life of that. I know that some people I'm going to hit it off with. A lot of people is going to think that I'm all right. Some people can't fucking stand me, and they'll let you know about it.
Mhm.
And that's just it. That's the way it's been since the sandcastles.
Yeah.
What are you going to do?
Yeah,
not-
you win some, you lose some.
Yeah, he does still have the coolest Legos and Matchbox cars. I mean, he's an all right guy. Yeah, I know he hates my guts, but he's cool.
He's got that Super Nintendo system.
Yeah, that Super NES. All right, I'm actually jealous.
Yeah.
But all right, I'm going to jump off here. We'll cut this into like 30 or 40-minute segments, and we're just going to keep it going. I think once a week for now is good.
Yeah.
All right, brother.
Cool.
Until next time.
All right, dude. See ya.
Later.
And as always, this week's episode was brought to you by Steadfast Real Estate Group of Heritage First Realty in Wichita, Kansas. Visit them online at Steadfast, that's SteadfastICT.com, steadfastict.com, or call them at area code 316-461-2806 for all your home buying needs in Wichita, the Wichita area of Kansas. For all your home buying needs in Northeast Georgia, or really all in North Georgia, give me a call. I'm Clayton Blackwood. I'm part of the Hester Group, and we're under Harry Norman Realty. Give me a call at area code 316-409-7907, or visit my website at claytonblackwood.harrynorman.com. Clayton Blackwood is one word, and Harry Norman is one word. You know how the internet works. If you are in the Wichita area and you need a tub painted, call my buddy Jed and his life partner Alex at H&L Resurfacing. Their phone number is area code 316-209-4674. They're both Marine Corps veterans, and that is a locally owned business. They have a track record of success. Okay, next week, or probably in a couple of days, we're going to pick up in a new episode. See you guys then. Love you. Bye.